Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at all the patch 10.12 changes. So going over the champions getting buffed, champions getting nerfed, and then there's also quite a few changes to runes for this patch, also some changes to the dragon. So with all that being said, let's get started. So first here for Akali, she's getting a Q damage increase. The base is being increased by 5 at all ranks, and then also the AP ratio is being increased from 60% up to 65%. So this shouldn't really do too much for Akali. She is still going to be one of the weaker champions in both the top lane and in the mid lane for 10.12. She's definitely going to need more so of a buff to really bring her back into the meta. Next up here for Brand, his passive, the mana restored on a blaze kill, is being increased from 6 to 18 up to 10 to 30. So this is more so of a buff for mid lane Brand. It won't really do too much for support Brand, and the fact that mid lane Brand is a pretty niche pick. I don't think I've seen this champion played in the mid lane maybe more than 1 or 2 times this entire season, so I don't really think this is going to do too much for him. I think he's a relatively weak mid lane pick, and he should still remain that here for the coming patch. Now, kind of weird here that Senna is being buffed in 10.12. Now, I think Riot went out and said that this is more so of a buff towards AD carry Senna, or it's supposed to be buffed towards AD carry Senna, which makes sense because the passive buff there, the soul generation on kill, is being increased from 2 up to 8%. So they shouldn't really buff support Senna very much at all. It's going to more so buff AD carry Senna, but I just feel like AD carry Senna got gutted way too hard a couple patches ago. So even with this buff here, I just don't really see her coming back being a meta AD carry. The attack speed ratio increased there from 0.2 up to 0.35 though. That helps out both support and AD carry Senna. So in this next patch, I think if anything, support Senna does get a little bit stronger and AD carry Senna still will remain relatively weak. Now, Viktor's actually getting some decent buffs here in 10.12. It seems like whenever Viktor gets buffed, it's this very small buff that doesn't really do anything at all, but he's actually getting a decent buff here to his Q. Auto attack AP ratio increased from 55% up to 60%, and then Q, the shield AP ratio, being increased from 15 to 20%. When you get your Q upgraded though, it's going to be from 24% up to 32% there. So some actual pretty decent buffs to Viktor. I don't actually feel like he's in a terrible spot right now in 10.11. I think he's like B/A tier depending on the elo. So with these buffs here, I think he's going to solidify himself as a pretty solid A tier pick in this coming patch. And then final champion getting a direct buff is Xayah. Ultimate damage is being increased from 100 at rank 1 up to 125, going from 200 all the way to 375 when you get max rank in it. But keep in mind, that's not until level 16. A lot of games you don't even hit level 16 on Xayah, so you more so take a look at the rank 1 buff there to her ultimate, and it's 25 damage. It's not insane or anything, but I feel like Xayah, that's kind of all that she really needs. She just needs this one more buff, I think, to bring her up into a decent spot in solo queue. I feel like she's B/A tier, kind of in the same position as Viktor is right now in solo queue. So with this buff here, I think she will jump up into A tier for 10.12. So if we move on to the champions getting nerfed now, first for Cassio, base HP being decreased there from 575 down to 560, base armor decreased from 20 down to 18, but base MR is actually being increased from 30 up to 34. So I think depending on the matchup, this can actually end up being a buff, and depending on the situation, if you're up against an AD champion, this is going to be nerf. You're losing armor, you're losing HP. This is just a flat out nerf in AD matchups. But if you're going up against an AP champion, depending on like how much HP you save with that MR increase there, this could actually end up like being a buff for you in this coming patch, or at the very least, it's going to be like a very negligible change if you are up against an AP matchup. So I do expect Cassio to remain S tier for this coming patch. Like even in AD matchups, I don't think the change is really going to be enough to drop her down too much. So I don't really know what Riot is doing with this champion right now. For some reason, they buffed him last patch when he was already the strongest jungler in the game, and in 10.11 right now, he is the strongest jungler, so they're nerfing him in 10.12, and it's a pretty small nerf even. Like, why not just give him a decent nerf? He's the best champion in the game at the moment. I feel like he does deserve a little bit more of a nerf than this, but nevertheless, W minion damage being decreased from 60% down to 50%. I'm pretty sure that's just a revert of the buff they gave him last patch, so it's not going to do anything for him at all, or it's not going to bring him down in power at all, really. He will still remain an S tier jungler. And then for Trundle here, W move speed being decreased from 30% down to 20% at rank 1 in it. It's actually going to be increased from 50% up to 52% once you get max rank in it. So a lot of Trundle players right now have started to go phase rush on him. So the W move speed combined with phase rush just allows for you to stick onto your target extremely well. So this change here honestly probably isn't going to do too much for Trundle, just because you already have like a ton of movement speed from that phase rush and from the W here. So you're probably not going to notice it very much. It brings him down in power a little bit, but it's not going to shift him on the tier list. So next up here for Varus, he's getting a couple different nerfs. AD per level being decreased from 3.11 down to 3. Q total AD ratio decreased there from 1.1 down to 1, and then a max charge is going from 1.65 down to 1.5. So this will more so hit the lethality Varus than the on-hit Varus. I do still think that Varus is going to remain one of the better AD carries for this coming patch, but we might see more people now deviate over to going the on-hit build instead of the lethality. I feel like depending on the elo, he will be like an A/S tier pick for this coming patch. He's not going to drop down too much, so if you still want to play Varus, he will still be one of the better AD carries. And then the final champion getting a direct nerf for this patch is Yasuo. Base HP decreased from 523 down to 490, so you're losing 33 health there in the early game, which is actually a pretty big hit to his laning phase. Passive shield increased from 110 up to 130, and then W cooldown is being increased from 26 seconds up to 30 seconds, and that change there to his W is pretty significant as well, because you don't actually put points into your W until like at level 3 usually, and then you don't put another point until usually level 14. So throughout all of the early to mid game, it's just gonna have an extra 4 seconds on it now, which is gonna feel kind of bad for this coming patch, and you're definitely gonna notice that change. The change to his base HP and passive though, depending on the matchup, it's either gonna hurt him harder or it's not gonna hurt him as much. So if you're going up against a ranged mid lane champion, if you're up against a mage who's gonna poke you a lot in the laning phase, this is actually a pretty big hit, because it's very easy for like ranged champions to just proc your passive, get rid of that shield. So the extra 20 HP you're getting on the shield there isn't really going to matter that much in those ranged matchups. In melee matchups though, to where the enemy has to engage on you to proc your passive and you're actually going to benefit from that 20 extra HP, it's not going to be as bad of a change in those melee matchups. But the fact that you're losing 33 HP into ranged champions is definitely going to hurt his laning phase for this coming patch year. It's going to be a lot easier to bully him out in the laning phase, and I do think that he could drop down into B tier. He's either going to be an A/B tier pick for this coming patch. And then if we move on to taking a look at some changes here to dragons, to runes, to summoner spells, first off for the Cloud Rift, when the map turns into the cloud element, a couple changes here are going to happen. The movement speed in the wind areas is now being increased from 20% out of combat up to 30%, so this will allow you to rotate around the map a little bit quicker now if you are in the jungle in those areas to where you get the bonus movement speed. There's also going to be new scryer blooms outside of the base gates and near the tri-bush, so I honestly feel like this is a buff to teams that are behind. If the enemy team is really far ahead, if you're not able to contest any vision in your jungle, or you don't know if the enemy team is in your jungle, I feel like that scryer bloom now outside of your base gate is going to be really big. For example, if you need to try to get vision in your jungle to contest Baron, you can use that scryer bloom. You can see if the enemy has vision in your jungle. You can just take out their wards, because you're going to be able to spot their vision with that scryer bloom. So this is actually a pretty big buff to teams that do end up falling behind and they can't really exit their base. Now they're going to have a little bit more of a chance to exit their base and contest objectives later on in the game. And then if it ends up being an infernal element, if you get the infernal as your third dragon, then blast cones are now going to spawn near Gromp and also outside of base gate. So I don't feel like this one really favors one team more than the other. I just feel like it's going to be more so annoying than anything, like having blast cones all the way around the map, like pretty much in every certain position. I don't know, personally I don't really like this change, but nonetheless it is going to be introduced for next patch. And then for approach velocity here, it is getting a bit of a nerf. The movement speed is being decreased from just 15% no matter who impairs the target. It's going to be down to 7.5% when a team impairs a champion, and it's going to be still 15% if you impair them yourself. So for a champion like Olaf's really one of the only champions that runs this rune right now very consistently pretty much every single game, and I feel like he's still going to take this despite this nerf. If you can just hit your axe consistently on Olaf, you're still going to gain that 15% movement speed. I can't really think of too many other champions that run this at the moment. I know that Ashe in certain situations would look to run this rune, so it's not really going to affect her at all either. If you can land your W, if you can hit your auto attacks, you're still going to gain that 15% movement speed, so I don't really think this change is too big at all. People who are running it in previous patches are still going to run it in this coming patch. Now Ghost is getting kind of like a mini rework here. The movement speed is being decreased from 28% down to 20% early on in the game, from 45% down to 40% 40% later on. It's no longer going to require 2-second ramp up, so you're just going to have that 20% movement speed immediately. The cooldown is being increased though by 30 seconds from 180 down to 210, and the pretty big change here is that it's now going to add 4 to 7 seconds to the duration on takedown. So I feel like on a champion like Darius, who already does very well with this rune right now, this is going to be even better for him for this coming patch, because having that extra movement speed on the takedowns, or getting the duration extended I should say on the takedowns, is just going to be so big for him. If he can just find resets with his ultimate in team fights, he's going to be able to just continue chasing down his targets. It's going to be interesting to see if we see this rune more so on other champions as well. Like if we see a ghost flash meta come back in this patch here on certain mid lane champions, because if you can just find takedowns in team fights, then you could have ghost up for pretty much the entire team fight and just be able to kite around really easily for this coming patch. And then for the rune Guardian, it's also getting a mini rework for this patch. The range on it is being increased from 175 up to 350. Instead of triggering on any damage, it's now only going to trigger if you take 75 to 200 damage in the last 2.5 seconds, or if you take lethal damage. And this is a really nice change, because in previous patches, it would just be so frustrating if you'd be running this rune and the enemy support just walked up and like autoed you for like 40 damage and proc Guardian. It would just be a wasted Guardian, put it on a very long cooldown. So this is a really nice change to the rune. The shield is also being increased there from 70 scaling to 150. It's now going to be 80 scaling to 200, so a nice buff there to the shield. It is no longer going to give movement speed though, so that's a little bit of a nerf there, but I do feel like this is going to be a net buff to Guardian. The fact that it's getting 3 really good buffs there above is probably going to end up outweighing that nerf to the movement speed. Like yes, in certain situations it's going to feel kind of bad to not have that movement speed, but I do feel like all of the 3 buffs above will outweigh that nerf. Moving on to Predator now, there's a ton of different changes here to this rune, and I feel like with all these changes combined, it should now make this rune a lot more viable on more champions, or we're just going to see this rune I feel like a little bit more here in this coming patch. So the cooldown on it is being decreased from 150 down to 100 earlier on in the game, so 50-second decrease there, really big. You're going to be able to use this a lot more throughout the game. The damage on it though, it is being decreased, so this is the big nerf that it's getting. The damage on it is being halved, so going from 60 base down to 30. Later on it's going from 180 down to 90. Now they have removed the start of game cooldown on it, which could open things up for different strategies to where you start boots and take Predator. I feel like it's probably not going to happen, but it's now an option I guess for you to start boots and take Predator and look to go for some sort of like early game cheese play with it. The movement speed on it is being reduced by a little bit, so in previous patches you would get 67.5 movement speed immediately, and then after 1.5 seconds that would drop to 45%. Now in this next patch it's just going to be 45% move speed after 1.5 seconds, so you're going to be getting a little bit less movement speed for the first 1.5 seconds of usage there. It's also no longer going to have a channel activation, which is really big. The fact that this could get like disrupted, or the fact that you just needed to channel it out of combat, made the rune feel a little bit clunky in certain scenarios, so that's a really nice quality of life change there. Also, it's now only going to deal damage and end the movement speed when damaging champions. This is also really big here, because if you wanted to, if you like activated it and then you like wanted to farm a wave really quickly or something, like you couldn't do that. Or if you wanted to like hit dragon or something, you would just lose the movement speed, which felt pretty bad, and that's no longer going to happen in this coming patch. And then duration on the rune, it is being reduced there from 15 seconds down to 10 seconds, so a pretty decent hit there to that duration. But I just think overall, the fact that cooldown is being decreased by such a significant amount, decreasing by 50 seconds there in the early game, is just going to open things up for so many more gank opportunities. So these gank heavy junglers, say for example like Gragas, he's going to get indirectly stronger in this coming patch. We might see it being played more on Fiddlesticks. It could be played more on somebody like Rammus. Just any jungler that wants to gank a ton in the early game, it's just going to make their gank so much better now, or it's going to make it so that they can gank a lot more often and impact the map a lot more throughout the early game. So I feel like even though it does have a pretty decent damage decrease there, I do feel like all the other changes combined do outweigh that nerf. And then for Taste of Blood, really small change here. It's now going to have a cooldown tracker icon on your HUD, so you're now going to be able to track, I guess, when this rune is going to be back up and active for you. So I guess a nice little quality of life change if you are running this rune in this coming patch. And then lastly here for the Unflinching rune in the Resolve tree, it's getting a change to just make things a lot more simpler. It was kind of a confusing rune in previous patches to where you would gain slow resist and tenacity based on if you've just used a summoner spell or based on each summoner spell on cooldown, but that's no longer going to be the case. It's going to have no interaction with summoner spells. You're now just going to gain 10% tenacity and slow resistance for taking the rune, and that can be increased up to 30% based on missing HP. So you're going to have 30% tenacity if you do fall below 30% HP. So just a much more straightforward rune now for this coming patch. You know exactly what you're getting by taking this rune. Alright, so that's gonna be it, guys. That's gonna round out the video. Those were every single one of the changes heading into patch 10.12. So if you guys did enjoy this video, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.